It's showtime. Hello, everybody. Yay. Happy Monday. I hope you all had a fantastic weekend. Oh, yes. Welcome to Aquarius Rising Africa and our beautiful Professor Brice, who's the best teacher when it comes to our dodgy ancestors.
We got a hot, I was telling Shanti backstage, we got a really hot bad guy to talk about today.
I got to tell you,
this might be where the
wait until you see the pics. He's not bad at all. It's about time we had some nice eye candy, Brice, from our.
I think they learned in the early 1900s. They're like, if we really want to brainwash the people, we got to make the guys hot. So,
right. And they still haven't learned, though. They still haven't learned. The only hot guys that are in the cabal are the actors and actresses, right?
Yeah.
And most of them are inverted anyway. Now that we look at what's going on, so but politicians, no, I think Putin's probably the most desirable of the lot, and that's not saying much.
Yeah.
Politicians.
Speaking of politicians, before we get, I have to share. I wish I had it on my phone. My sister shared it because my sister has toddlers, right? She's got young babies. And there was a picture of Biden standing there, and the way he was standing there, and it was like every mother of a toddler knows that look because it's the look when the toddler is pooping their pants. You know, the way he was standing there. So at least we can make fun of how ugly I'm sure Biden was pooping his pants too. So, how the mighty have fallen. Like, we're the country that 17-year-olds kicked the British military out. Now we've got a president pooping his pants. Like,
can you believe it's like crazy?
So I have to say, I was reading the chat. I got Charmaine. I was telling Shanti, first of all, girl, I'm glad you got your glass of wine this weekend, Charmaine. I'm so glad you got to relax. Get your wine, girl. I think Shanti and I, I think I can speak for us. We're not daily drinkers, but we enjoy a good cocktail every now and again. Charmaine, I was telling Shanti that you made the best. I'm going to paraphrase what you said. You said, what did you say? You said, with the history, you're like, same story, different names to protect the guilty. And I thought that's genius. What they're not creative. They're smart, but they're not creative. So they use the same playbooks over and over and over again to, again, protect the guilty, as Charmaine awesomely pointed out. So, but at least this guy's hot. That's all I gotta say. Like, at least he's not bad.
Yeah, I mean, even I've got to agree with Brice this time, guys. Even I have to agree. I was like, a little bit of eye candy there.
I know. He's good looking. And we're finally, you guys, this is going to be the second to last episode, probably. I don't want to say for sure because God knows I'll probably find something else when I'm researching for next week's story to talk about. But this is going to be the second to last episode over the Romanovs because we're here. We are at the end we're at the caboose of the Romanov train where we came to the Romanovs for this story to understand what actually happened to Anastasia Romanov. And we're not going to get to what we think happened today because today we have to look at everything leading up to that night. I think it was July 17th of 1918 when they were all executed. So, and it's freaking, I just kid you not, my friends. I know we said this with Rasputin, but there is, and I'm not even going to really mention Rasputin today. That's a whole other episode of some other shenanigans that we did at the end of last year going on at this time. There are so many. Like, you think about what we're going through right now on planet Earth and everything, all the distractions, there's so much going on. The same thing was happening back then because it is hard to keep your eye just on one spinning wheel of what was going on at this time of the rising of the Bolsheviks and the eventual destruction of the Romanovs. But again, the huge lesson in this, Shanti, we were kind of bitching about this offline as well. Like, I'm seeing history repeat itself because the Bolsheviks, in my opinion, are no different than the truther community today. Right. They were the truther community of that time. The Romanovs, our cabal, their monarchy. I actually think Nicholas II was a pretty decent guy. We'll talk about that, but that still doesn't excuse the fact that that a monarchy is a pecking order. It's elitism. It's worshiping the leaf, which serves the self. And then this Bolshevik revolution was able to rise up under the guise. So what's the guise of communism? The guise of communism is everybody's equal. We're all going to like live communally. We're going to have a great, beautiful life. Well, that's not what happened, right? That's not what happened. And so this is another really important aspect looking at the Romanovs, because I think we have to learn from our ancestors' mistakes. We have to, because otherwise, in my opinion, this is just my opinion, the truther community is walking us straight into the New World Order. That is my opinion. What's the difference between waiting for the government to send you money from Nasara and what Vladimir Lenin? There's no difference, right? So the only way we can really walk away from this potency, that's this like nastiness we're living in, is to walk away from both, be able to kind of move away from all sorts of control and actually take our power back. And so anyway, but so I hope that you guys will consider that as we're going through this. Just look at the similarities. Like look, I mean, we're going to joke about things and obviously it's fun to gossip, but just look at the similarities between the humans in the early 20th century and us humans now in the early 21st century. No different. Our clothes are, at least back then they knew the difference between a man and a woman. I'll give them that. They didn't know what a man and a woman was.
Well, listen, no, hang on. I'm not sure about that. Not after some of the pics you've shown us, girlfriend.
At least there were no Zay Zims and people running around pretending to be animals. Like
unless you were speaking with a Russian or a German accent.
Oh my God! I there's going to be some German words or some Russian words I'm going to have to say. Zim. Yeah, exactly. I can't, you guys. Like Russian and German to me, I have a friend that speaks fluent German, and she's like, every time she speaks to her parents, because her parents are German, she always on the phone, like when I would be around her, she'd apologize because she goes, I know that sounded like we were yelling at each other. We were actually telling each other we loved each other, because German is such an abrasive language that it like shocks you. You know, but I mean, you think about how these languages were developed too. You look at like, you know, in northern Germany and Russia, it's predominantly it's a colder environment, right? So you see like down here in the South, we have very slow accents down here because it's hot as hell, you know? So you see how accents and languages kind of develop with territory as well. So, but nonetheless, it's, you know, this is the story of humanity. Even though I'm not Russian, this is definitely, I can look at what happened to the Russians and understand like this is humanity's story. And again, I want to, I know we say this almost every single episode, Shanti, and it probably should go without say, when we're talking about these battles that happen in these groups, we're not talking, I mean, we know that the people got tricked, but we're not really, we're not really talking about the people, right? Like I have empathy for the Russian people. I understand why they fell for the antics of the Bolsheviks. And I'm actually very grateful that did happen, that I can learn, like their lives weren't lived in vain. We can look at this now and learn from them and be grateful to them for showing us where future mistakes can be made and help us kind of course correct. But I do absolutely understand why a lot of the Russian people fell into the trap of the Bolsheviks. Just like I absolutely understand why a lot of people, including myself at times, have fallen into the trap of the truther community, right? You're looking for answers. You're looking for a path out of the chaos that you're in, when really that path out of that chaos lies within you. It's not outside of you. And putting your faith in one person to save you is never gonna, I mean, yeah, as Charmaine just said, nothing is free no matter what they say. There's no such thing as a free lunch. And when, you know, my mother used to say that growing up, she would say, if you allow the government to take care of you, then you allow the government to control you, right? Because the person that controls the pocketbook is the person who's in control. And so we have to learn how to do things ourselves again so that we don't have to rely on people that don't have our best interest at heart. And absolute power corrupts absolutely, right? So, so shall we get, this is going to be kind of, I'm going to kind of jump around a little bit, guys, because there's a lot of different, again, a lot of different things to talk about. And I do want to cover the Cossacks because we had that question last week. and they're very interesting. The Cossacks are very, very interesting group of people. So we're going to talk about them a little bit after we go through what was called Bloody Sunday. And I know throughout history, there's been a lot of Bloody Sundays, but for this story, Bloody Sunday, which happened on January 9th of 1905, was very, very, very much a turning point in this, can we say shit show? This is shit show part 1. We're now in shit show part 2, right? Like, and so when we talk about, I know we can't say this word on YouTube, but we'll talk about false flappy things that you know what we're talking about. We'll say a fake flag that, you know,
fake flags. Yeah,
we'll say it that way because of the algorithms. But, you know, and our friend Catherine Edwards brought up a good point. She had quoted somebody else, but I thought she brought this up on a show I did with her, that that just because these fake things happen, these fake flappy things happen, doesn't mean that people don't get hurt. It just means that the guilty party is protected. You don't, as Charmaine was saying. So as we go through the controversy and the fake news around this Bloody Sunday, I want you to remember that people were hurt, but the bad guy in this situation wasn't who you think it is. It was all orchestrated to make it look a certain way, to sway people to join the Bolsheviks, to take down the Romanovs. I mean, both of these are bad guys, right? And that's the thing about the negative side. There's no honor amongst thieves. They will sometimes, like, I'm so sick of this black hat, white hat crap. I'm like, there are no white hat guys. There are no white hats. There are maybe some gray hats, but there's no, like, you know, every man's for himself, right? Like, there's nobody. And if people are doing things in the shadows for the good for the good of man, if they're doing it in the shadows for the good of man, it's not for the good of man because they didn't get your consent, right? It's not, you know, so we just have to be aware of these things. This takes a lot of critical thinking skills and a very complex thought here. But so basically on Sunday, January 9th, 1905, Russian citizens marched to the Winter Palace to present a petition to Nicholas II. And these numbers are weird to me, guys. Like, I was a little like, what? When I kept double checking these numbers. It's estimated between 3,000 and 50,000 protesters. That seems like I can understand if they're like between 3,000 and 5,000.
I mean, between 3,000 and what, 50,000?
Yeah, I checked multiple sources and I was like, that's a lot of, like, that's a big stretch. Like, I don't know if
does no one even know the difference though? I mean, could they not count what?
Right. Part of me thinks maybe because it was in St. Petersburg that maybe they don't know who was actually part of the protest and who was just watching or who was working, or maybe some citizens so maybe that might be why there's a huge gap in like 3,000 to 50,000, because that really threw me for a loop. But nonetheless, they basically, now this is, again, forgive my Russian. I thought this was really, really interesting. So a strike, which is what we call it in English, like to strike, to not work. That comes from in Russia, that word is stachka. Stachka means strike in Russia. Stachka comes from a word that is stakatsya. Stakatsya, I hope I'm saying that right. And stakatsya means to conspire for a criminal act. So at this point, to strike against the government in Russia was actually to conspire for a criminal act. However, what ended up happening, the aftermath of this strike, might not be what we think it is. This might have been instigated by the Bolsheviks in order to really push the tides against the Romanovs. Because if you guys, so we kind of spoke about this last week. So the coming into the 20th century in Russia, with the freeing of the serfs having to pay this tax in 1861, having to pay this tax back to the poor, bless their hearts, the nobles, bless their hearts. They lost their free slaves, so now we got to pay them more money, so the nobles are okay. So these majority of the people in Russia are just destitute. They are living in literal squalor, right? They are living in one-roomed houses with their families and their animals. They can't afford food. They're working. The Industrial Revolution is here, and so they're having to go. We talked about this with the child strike of 1899, but that was in New York City. In New York City, even though there was poverty in New York City, it was nothing compared to what was going on in Russia. And again, Russia has more severe weather, right? So there's more of a fight for human life. And so basically, these protesters were going to present a petition to Nicholas II, Tsar Nicholas II. just basically asking for like to cut them some slack. Like, can we get, and this was before we had any type of human rights. This is before we had any type of child labor laws in the world, for better or for worse. So that's what they were kind of requesting. Like they weren't going to Nicholas II saying like, we want to be, just as rich as you are. We just want a more, we want to be free. We want a freedom to like have more, keep more of our money. And so it was really very harmless. And a lot of the strikers, the protesters, at this point were not opposed to the monarchy. In fact, a lot of them carried pictures of Nicholas II because if we remember back to the very beginning, czar, the word czar, the kingiest of kings, as I like to call them, they're not a king, they're a czar, which comes from the Roman Empire Caesar. So they are almost, the Romanovs are almost seen as godlike to the Russian people, and they're almost deified, which again is a negative polarity. We'll get into that because, in the positive side, there is no divine right. There's no divine bloodline. We're all equal. But with that being said, they weren't there to hurt Nicholas. Obviously, they had a lot of respect for the monarchy and the government. They just wanted their voices to be heard, like cut them some slack. Okay. So now this strike was organized by a priest named Gregory Gapon. And this is the hot guy. Shall we show the hot guy, Gapon? And
the hottie.
Studying
hottie.
I was like, how
is that that one there?
Yeah, there he is. There's Gapon. Look at those cheekbones. Look at those cheekbones, guys.
Look at those eyes. I mean, everything about him is nice, actually. His stance, his nose, the strength of his face. Yeah, no, he's a hottie. He's a hottie.
Yeah. So he's got a thick head of hair. He's got those, yeah. So obviously they had figured out because Charmaine, oh mama, like I'm real like Vladimir Lenin wasn't that cute. So Jessica, I do same Jessica. Like I'm saying, you guys, like I'm a pretty smart chick, but if the cabal wants to fool me, just put a hot guy in front of me. Like I turn giggly again. Like like this is my weakness. Like when I was studying this, I was like, who is this guy? Like, where was he in my history books? This would have been way more fascinating to look at him in history class. Like there he is. There's Gapon. There's our Vogue model Gapon, right? So he was the guy who literally like he created this strike, that turned out to be Bloody Sunday. But here's the deal, you guys. So he was a priest, okay? He was a priest who pretended to be like totally for the people. He wanted to like really live Jesus's word, but y'all, he was a double agent.
But of course he was a double agent. It's always the most gorgeous one that were. I mean, how do you think this guy's not a double agent? Let's face facts.
Why has Hollywood not made a movie about this? Because I mean, cast Brad Pitt as him, whoever you think it, like this makes sense. Like this makes sense why people fall for that. When you see pictures like that, you're like, I get it. You're like, I totally get it. I get it. I get why people fell for this because, there we go. So he was a double agent. So he worked for the Russian secret police. And the Russian secret police specifically guarded the imperial family. Now, these were mostly Cossacks, which again, we're going to get into it. His father was a Ukrainian Cossack. His mother was a peasant. We're going to get into who the Cossacks were. So he was playing both sides of the field. Not only was he playing both sides of the field, but he was working one-on-one with Vladimir Lenin. So he wasn't a secret police trying to protect the Romanovs from getting information from Vladimir Lenin. He was literally working with Vladimir Lenin trying to get information from the Romanovs to screw over the Romanovs. So here's the thing, you guys. This is why and I want you guys to think back, especially those of us who live in major cities, especially in the United States, think back to the summer of 2020. Here in Atlanta, the summer of 2020 was one of the most terrifying experiences I've ever been through. We actually packed bags because we had these riots, right? Remember the summer of love, as they said it was? And there was bricks literally laid out on all corners of the block for, I don't know, I don't want to say their names that start with an A, A-N-T. I won't say anymore. You guys know what I'm talking about. And the B, another letter, and then M. to pick up and like shatter windows, and it was all hell broke loose.
Indian
Right?
with a B. Starts with a B. Do I have to take him off the screen yet?
Yeah, you can take him off. Oh, we might have. I know.
Okay.
Girls might not be paying attention anymore to what we're saying because they're just staring. I would just be staring. Like, yes, I'll do what you want. So I want you guys to think back to the summer of 2020 as to what we're going to do, because we know that was all set up. That was all set up, right? Summer of 2020. Same thing here. Exact same playbook. So Gapon organizes this strike to take. He's getting people to come to the Winter Palace to bring this list. Gapon's the mighty beautiful. It's like hot Jesus. Like we see pictures of Jesus now, and Jesus looks all hot with his like 6-pack on the cross. That's not what Jesus looked like, right? Y'all shouldn't look like that, right? Right? He has Pantene Pro-V hair, like that's Gapon. Like, he's this like beautiful man that's like, I'm gonna save you, right? No, he knew. Gapon knew because he had been working with the
Okay, ladies, I'll appease you. I'll appease the ladies.
The hot guy. So Gapon knew that Nicholas II was not going to be at the Winter Palace that day. So we already have a setup. Nicholas II was not going to be he knew that, but he still arranged for all these people to go and petition Nicholas. The people on the strike thought Nicholas was going to be there, but Gapon knew he wasn't going to be there. So guess what else so basically the way we hear, and I'm getting ahead of myself because I'm like, y'all, it's so obvious now. It's such propaganda. So they're marching peacefully to Nicholas II, who's not there, but they think he's there with their list. They're holding pictures of Nicholas II. It's very peaceful. Well, all of a sudden, the Cossacks, who are the imperial guards of the family, open, and I don't want to say the word because of YouTube, but that thing. Like that thing with these. Yeah. Open FIRE on the crowd. About now this is interesting because they say about 1,000 to 40,000 died, which again is another like
1,000 to 40,000. I mean, that's crazy.
I mean, if y'all didn't know this was a fake story, I think the numbers kind of like give it away. But anyway, so how did this happen? So basically what happened, y'all, like again, think about what happened in 2020. What happened was they planted Bolshevik revolutionaries into the peasantry crowd that was the innocent people who were just petitioning Nicholas II. And once they started walking towards the Winter Palace, y'all want to know what happened? These Bolsheviks who had, they were armed, we'll say, started looting, started breaking into businesses, so violence broke out. And because violence broke out, the Cossacks guarding the imperial palace had to react and open because they were under attack, under siege. And it wasn't the peasants. The peasants had no idea. The people were just following the hot guy. They just followed the hot guy off the cliff. They just wanted to give Nicholas their letter. Please, Nicholas II, can we please just have some human rights, right? Meanwhile, Nicholas wasn't there, and they had people stationed to start a riot. So that's they knew if they started the riot that the Cossacks would have no choice but to attack the peasants. And they knew what was going to happen. So after this happened in St. Petersburg, the tides, they were already shifting. But all of a sudden, everybody hated the Romanovs because they didn't realize, no one realized until recently that Gapon set this up with Vladimir Lenin. So the bad guy, the person responsible for this bloodshed was Vladimir Lenin and Gapon. Unfortunately, we'll say Gapon was just following Lenin because he's hot. It wasn't the Romanovs. The Romanovs were just, the imperial guards were just defending the property of the palace. They did not shoot first. They didn't throw the first punch. So that shooketh me to my core. When I saw that, I was like, oh my fucking God, they're doing the same thing now. And they think we're that dumb, which fair play to them. We kind of are that dumb because people are still falling for it. That even we have social media now. So all over the world, all of a sudden people in all these countries were like, oh, they were horrified by the news. I think last week we read something from the New York Herald of all these peasants being killed by, they were horrified all over the world. So now the Romanovs are looking real bad. And they weren't even there. Nicholas II wasn't even there. Wasn't even there. So even though the Romanovs themselves are not a good entity, I do like, and I've said this before many times, when we look at these organizations that are inherently polarized negative, we also have to look at individuals. And I do have a lot of empathy for Nicholas II. I think Nicholas II, I think Abel was right when Abel said had the mind of Christ. I have a lot of empathy for Nicholas II. I think he was born into an impossible situation. Oh, but by the grace of God, go I. Like, I think it's hindsight's 2020. I think it's easier for us to think of what we would have done in that situation, but we never know until we're actually in that situation, right? And so I actually, out of all the kings and queens I've ever studied on my channel or for our Aquarius Rising Africa, he is one that I actually think I have empathy for him. We see a lot of service to other things that he does, even though he's in the service. It's just I have empathy for him. All right. So after this happened, this event greatly, I'm just reading from my notes. This event greatly inspired the beginning of the Russian Revolution of 1905. But obviously the Bolsheviks, that's what they wanted. They got what they wanted, right? Now, let me try to find my notes here. So now, after this happened, Gapon fled Russia at the end of January and went to Switzerland to start working one-on-one with Vladimir Lenin. And with Lenin, he continued to put propaganda out. We talked about this last week, where Lenin was like sending propaganda into Russian from all these other countries. Now, unfortunately, maybe it was a lover's quarrel, I don't know, but Gapon was murdered the following year by the Social Revolutionary Party on the 28th of March, 1906. So he ended up, there are actually some pictures of him, like I didn't share that picture of him actually dead, but so he pissed someone off, like, and that is a lesson. Like, anytime you're messing with negative entities, there's no honor amongst thieves, right? They're going to stab you in the back at some point. So let's talk a little bit about the Cossacks, because this is fascinating to me too. And again, the Cossacks are traditionally, they still are traditionally, they're still a group in Russia that guarded the imperial family. They didn't start off that way. And we know that Gapon himself, his father was a Cossack. So who are the Cossacks? Well, basically, the Cossacks were kind of like the Vikings of Eastern Europe, or still are, I guess. They came later than the Vikings, though. The Cossacks were Eastern Slavic Orthodox Christian people from Eastern Ukraine and Southern Russia. They were a loose federation of independent countries. The word Cossack means a nomad. They were nomads, okay? They were the founders of Kazakhstan, which is very fascinating, because Kazakhstan is obviously, from what I understand, a pretty big player in things that are going on. However, again, looking at the Cossacks, we see some bad stuff, but we also see good stuff too. We know that the darkness can't create anything. So I think we can see where the darkness starts to infiltrate a lot of these groups. Because the Cossacks, by the 1500s, they were one of the most influential groups of the Eastern world. They became very powerful, you guys, because they lived in a very dangerous frontier. They spoke many languages. Kazakhstan actually translates to land of bandits. So for the beginning of the Cossacks, these were people, mostly men. We're going to get to the women, because even though what they did to the women was awful, it still kind of makes me laugh. I don't think I sent you a picture, Shanti, of how they got their women, but we'll talk about this. Even though I feel bad for the women, I kind of giggle. But they lived on the steppe, which is an area of Eastern Europe that was very inhospitable. So they were nomadic, and they learned how to survive in an area of Eastern Europe that most people, like towns, countries, didn't really want that area, because it was inhospitable. You couldn't. It reminds me a lot of like Utah in America. Like Utah is when they first settled it. I don't know, obviously history might be not exactly as we think it is, but it was very hard for them to settle it because it was a very inhospitable land. Same thing with where the Cossacks. So because of this, because they were met with such challenge, the Cossacks grew very, very strong, right? They were really great on horses. They were really, really great at navigating the sea. So what started to happen is that the Cossacks started to form allies with different states around them over a few hundred years because they were such good militaristically, they were strong men. And so other states wanted to be allies with the Cossacks, not because the Cossacks had any material gains to offer the state, but they had military protection. And so the Cossacks started to develop their wealth. They would agree to protect certain states for exchange for some wealth, right? Well, at some point, the Cossacks did decide to set up villages and permanent home bases. But the problem, if you don't have women, then you don't have really a society, right? Because they're, contrary to popular belief nowadays, only women can have babies. So, and I wish now I'm kind of regretting I didn't send you this picture because what the Cossacks would do, you guys, and I'm sorry I'm laughing because it's so horrific what they did, but these pictures were hysterical. They would go to neighboring, or sandwiches, yeah, someone got to feed them. They would go to neighboring states and they would just like kidnap women. But they wouldn't just kidnap women, guys. They would like literally put a cage on their head and then lead them away with a leash.
I would be so pissed off if someone did that to me. I swear, I would literally become like a wild lioness. That's what I would do if someone tried to do that to me.
I'm regretting I didn't send you a picture now. I wish I'd sent you a picture because some of the pictures is just like this woman with a cage being led away. Like it's like I'm just like, so nobody stopped them. Like nobody was like you're just like walking down the street and all of a sudden a cage goes over your head. Like
and just like leads you away like you're a dog on a leash. I mean, how insulting.
You're like being led away. You're like, well, I guess I'm the prettiest. Like they just like picked me out of the crowd, So yeah, it was yes, just their heads, and they got pulled away. And I guess the men though in the neighboring states didn't want to mess with the Cossacks. They knew the Cossacks would kick their ass. So they're probably like, that's cool, you can have her. Anyway, so that's how they got women. So now, but what happened was, so with the Cossacks, one thing that was really cool about the Cossacks is they did not believe in, which is interesting because of how it turns out for the Romanovs. But at this point, before they started really partnering with the imperial family, the Cossacks for a long time did not believe in monarchy. They were one of the first groups to work in a democracy. So they would pick a leader, and they would vote by applause. So whoever got the biggest applause would be the leader. And they had term limits. Like, how innovative is that? The Cossacks literally had term limits, something we don't really have any. We have them, but not really. The leader could only lead for a year. And then once the year was up, a new leader had to be picked, which that's pretty cool that they did that. Not so cool. Like I'm kind of trying to look at the pros and the cons here. So anyway, when they would go off, now one thing about the Cossacks too, even though they stole their wives, a couple of generations in with now women breeding and life is now normal, they gave their women a lot of power. And that was very different. And we're talking about the 1700s. These women, the Cossack women were almost as powerful as the men. Still not quite, but they had a lot of power. They were there was a Cossack saying back then that if a man only has power if his wife is his best friend. And I think that's really
so true.
Yeah. They respected, even though they didn't respect the women when they were fishing for the women, but once the women had been integrated into their couple generations down, so it's kind of ironic, right? It's a little ironic that they just took a woman against her will, but once, a couple generations in, women were very much like respected and were treated. The men would go home and there's a huge thing I read about how the Cossack men, like before they made decisions, imagine this, would go home and sit and have a conversation with their wives and see what their wives thought. That is crazy for this time period. You're like, wow, like that is really wild. However, it does get corrupted because again, now the Cossacks used to piss the nobles off of Russia, because even though the Cossacks for a long time, their economic background was similar to a peasant, they did not act like peasants. So whenever they had to do business with a noble, the Cossacks would look the noble in the eye and keep their head held high, whereas peasants would always look down. So the nobles would get really agitated by the Cossacks, which I find hysterical. Like the fact that these people, like they needed the Cossacks, but they didn't like the They actually they couldn't say anything, right? Like they couldn't be like, don't they had because they needed the Cossacks. So the Cossacks would hold their head up high. Well, over time, what started to happen, as it does, is more and more and more Cossacks started to work closer with the nobles and started to get wealthier. For a long time, the Cossacks were pretty even keeled. They were all pretty equal. But when we get close to the mid 19th century, coming into the 20th century, we're seeing a huge divide in the Cossack, where we have peasant Cossacks and we have elite Cossacks. The elite Cossacks became the imperial guards of the royal family. And so they were paid very handsomely. Again, they're another thing too with the Cossacks. They're one of the first groups that figured out, and probably because of where they lived, they actually worked out. Like they would exercise for the purpose of maintaining health and strength. Whereas in other European cultures, the only exercise we see is sports, like jousting. Like there's no concept of like training. Like they would have military training to train the troops for battle, but the Cossacks very differently actually started this concept of like working out, of taking time during their day to work on their physical strength. And they figured that out because their life every day demanded, because of where they lived, them being as strong as possible, which I thought that was pretty cool. So listen, if you're gonna get, just like Gapon, if you're gonna get your head stuck in a cage and led away by a leash, at least that man's probably gonna have a six pack, like silver lining, right? Like at least he's gonna look good, right? So, but I thought that was super. As somebody who exercises a lot, no, Shanti, you do too. Most of our, like, I thought that was fascinating that they actually, again, we know there was exercise happening. Like people go for walks to stretch their legs. But the purpose for the Cossacks is, that was clever of them to like really understand, like doing push-ups and like really keeping themselves, not just getting fit for a certain, yeah, I thought that was fascinating. So that's why they still maintained really good, they were really good military men. So they were offered, I guess you can call it a military industrial complex, right? They became very powerful and very rich, some of them guarding the imperial family. So, but the rest of the people who did not do deals with the nobles, Cossacks, were merged into serfdom. So all of a sudden the Cossacks kind of get swallowed up by Russia and Ukraine. We still have a lot of Ukrainian Cossacks. They get swallowed up by these countries and they kind of filter into the social structure. So we have Cossacks who are guarding the imperial family and Cossacks who are peasants. So when it comes to Bloody Sunday, we've got Gapon, whose father was a Ukrainian Cossack, who is tricking other Cossacks. There was animosity, right? So there became animosity between, even within the Cossacks, like conquer and divide, right? Conquer and divide. For a group that started off pretty cohesive, you know, besides stealing women, that's that one little issue, pretty democratic, had term limits, respected women. For a group that seemed to be pretty integral for a while, they got in there and they infiltrated and they conquered and divide. Now you can still, Cossacks, if you guys like look up there, they wear the hats, the Russian hats that you kind of, I think most people associate with Russia, the kind of harem pants. Like if you looked up the Cossacks, you would definitely see, you would know what they look like. And they still today, like there was a website, a Nicholas II website that I was looking at, and a current one where they're still currently doing research, because it's still, we're going to get to that next. So they're still researching into this particular Russian family. And we'll talk about why they're doing that today, but we'll get to the research next week. There's still a whole group of Cossacks who salute the statue. Like there's a statue of Alexei that they put up, and they salute the statue of Alexei because, you know, that was their meal ticket. All right. So I thought that was interesting. So that's the Cossack story. Now let's start talking about, let's switch now to the actual Romanovs. All right. So by the time Nicholas II came to the throne in 1896, he basically was damned if he did and damned if he didn't. Like there was nothing this man could do. If you guys remember, as we've been talking about all these weeks for like 100 years now, probably over 100 years, there has been a snowball of people, of revolutionaries resisting the Tsar. And again, the Tsar of Russia, let me reiterate this, is very different from the other monarchs, because the Tsar is the kingiest of kings. The Tsar is not under the Pope. They have their own Russian Orthodox Church, right? They are the Caesars. Tsar means Caesar. So there's even more consolidated power in Russia than there is in any other royal family in the European Union, as we say today, European Union, with that being said, all of these monarchs are related to each other. We know that. So Alex, the Tsarina, his wife, Alexandra, who was Victoria's granddaughter, who was from Germany. We're going to talk a little bit about that today. And her husband, Nicholas II, Romanov, they were both first cousins. Both of them were first cousins to King George V, who was sitting on the English throne at this time. And King George V could have saved them, but he didn't. We'll talk about that in a second. All right, so July 28th, 1914, World War I starts. Now, for a hot second, World War I kind of saves the Romanovs, but only for a hot second, okay? Because Nicholas II, at this point, for about 9 years now, he's trying everything. He's trying to figure out what to do to fix this problem. Like, he's really trying to figure out, again, I have a lot of empathy. I think he was just born. I think he was, in my opinion, I think Nicholas II, I don't know for sure, didn't know him, obviously. I think he was a person with a soul who was born into the Romanov family. I think he was put in a very tough position, and I think he was trying to do what he could. That's just now, again, in saying that, there does not need to be monarchy. There does not need to be a monarchy. But again, oh, by the grace of God, go I. What do you do in this situation? You're the firstborn son. So he basically, when World War I breaks out, now Russia was allied. They were probably allied, not the Axis. So they were with the United States, Great Britain. They were against Germany, right? So I saw a very funny video of Germany, like, now going like, oh my God, for the first time, we're going to be on the good guy side. Like, do we get t-shirts? What do we do, guys? We've never been on the good guy side before. So Germany is going to be a problem. Obviously, World War I, World War II, again, not the German people, not the German, we're talking about these government systems, right? So Nicholas II decides that in order to restore faith in the monarchy, he needs to become the commander-in-chief of the army. So Nicholas II excuses his cousin, who was commander-in-chief, and he becomes the commander-in-chief of the army. So this means that Nicholas II has now left St. Petersburg, and he is with his troops. Now, he's never in a situation where he is on the battlefield, but he's with his troops. And for a hot second, it worked. The people were very impressed that he agreed to go and put his life in danger, even though he was on the battlefield, to be with the Russian army, to be with his men. Okay, but now we got a problem, because since he is now away from St. Petersburg, this is before internet and cell phones, his wife, the Tsarina, is now taking more political control over day-to-day life. Now, y'all, she's German by birth. So people start to get suspicious because she's German by birth. And who's the enemy in this war? Germany. So again, they're damned if they do, and they're damned if they don't, right? If Nicholas comes back to St. Petersburg and abandons the army, he's going to be shamed for abandoning the army. If he stays with the army, he's going to be shamed because his wife is German. And there's no evidence. I mean, but frankly, people said she was kind of ditzy anyway. She was kind of a bobblehead. So I think it's hysterical when his historians like she was dumb. Like, she didn't like, I find that hysterical. So I don't think that she had any type of ill intent. She was also, again, this is when Rasputin was getting in control, kind of taking control of the royal family because of his, she felt like Alexei, their youngest son, was staying alive. Again, I'm not going to rehash all the Rasputin stuff. Go back and watch that video, guys. We've already talked about Rasputin. So they're just really, again, anywhere they turn, they can't do anything right to the Romanovs, right? So now one thing that's interesting about Alexandra and Nicholas as well, is that usually that I kind of find endearing, when we have royal marriages, usually they're arranged, right? So there's not a lot of love between the king and the queen. Well, Alex was not the woman who was picked for Nicholas. She's the woman Nicholas fell in love with. So the Tsarina and the Tsar were a love match. In fact, it is stated that Nicholas's father, Alexander III, did not actually want him to marry her. They didn't think she was a good match for him. However, because he got sick and he knew he was going to die, he had kidney issues, he went ahead and agreed to the marriage because he needed his son to be prepared to take the throne, and he needed a wife. So they really, really loved each other. Now, with that being said, and I think this has a lot to do with how they parented. as well, because out of all the czars in the world and the monarchy, they were one of the most involved parents with their children. They were very involved with their children. And I thought this was kind of sweet, because I told you guys a few episodes ago that I think that they were really trying to have a son because of the prophecy. You know, that kind of, we talked about that a few weeks ago, Abel's letter, where he said, you know, a peasant with an axe is going to take the throne, blood will spill, the czar will be betrayed. And they had 4 daughters before they had Alexei. And I kind of, and reading, I was doing some more research on people who really study the Romanovs and go through their old, because you can see video footage of these people. Like, these were early 19, like, there's video footage of them, right? Nicholas II was 100%, from what I researched, #girl dad. Nicholas II was such a girl dad. He loved, I actually got kind of emotional watching some of the footage. He loved his daughters. He just thought his daughters were the bee's knees. It was more the Tsarina, his wife, that was really trying to have a son. And again, I think a lot of that was spawned by the prophecy, because we know, we've seen it happen before in the Romanovs, where if there is no son, then the Tsar will just pass the throne to one of his nephews, right? So it's not like there has to be one, but I think a lot of that, again, was how, I think that letter fucked with their head a little bit. And so when Alexei was born, obviously he was born with hemophilia. But what I find interesting is Nicholas II was especially close to Anastasia, the woman who, the little girl. She's not a woman. She didn't live to be a woman, allegedly. We'll talk about that next week. His last daughter. It was Olga, Tatiana, Maria, Anastasia, and Alexei. And Anastasia was a tomboy. She loved to play outside. She loved to get her knees dirty. And so Nicholas would go outside and like push her on the swing. Like, he was such a girl dad. And we have to understand too that, again, in this time period, monarch, especially just noble people in general, aristocrats in general, were not that involved with their children. The nannies were involved with the children, and they did have nannies, of course they did. But even in the peasantry class, children were not really coddled. They were out working in the freaking slaughterhouses, right? So the Romanov children were as far as being royal kids, I think they had as a close of a normal family as we can probably see in any, because they just had parents that cared. And so, of course, this could be seen as a weakness by the people, because he was so involved in his children's life and he loved being with his kids. But in early 1970, Alexei, the little boy who had hemophilia, got the measles. Now, the measles suck anyway, but he has hemophilia. So it's even more stressful because he's already sick. And they were trying to keep the hemophilia information away from the public knowledge. That's why Rasputin was able to get his claws into the family. Then all of a sudden, as what happens in most households with siblings, my sister and I had the chicken pox at the same time. The kids also got that. The girls also got the measles. And so around this time, the princess, or the queen, the Tsarina, all the kids have to have their hair shaved off, even the girls. And so she does what any mother would do. She goes to be with her children. But that's a problem, because she's also in charge of the state. So what we see as love, like genuine love from a parent, is an issue, is working against them in regards to the state. Again, we're in the middle of a world war at this point. I think the World War I caused a lot of necessary chaos too, in order for Lenin to really gain power as well. And again, they are damned if they do, they are damned if they don't. And so if she had not gone off to help her children, the papers might have written propaganda about how horrible of a mother she is. But she went off, and so now who's watching the state? Now actually Rasputin was dead by now. He was killed in 1916. So when the kids got the measles and got so sick, Nicholas II made the decision that he was going to leave the front lines for a second, leave the army and be with his family. So he got on the train. This is a turning point. He got on the train to go back to St. Petersburg, but the train was stopped by Bolshevik revolutionaries. And they had to reroute him to get to St. Petersburg. At this time, this was on March 2nd, 1917, Nicholas makes the decision to abdicate the throne. Now, this decision, in my opinion, as a student of the Law of One, was a positive polarity decision. He surrendered the throne. First he abdicated to his younger brother Michael, who didn't. He basically said, "If I'm the problem, I'm gonna step back. I've heard the people." And he wrote in his journal, "The bottom line is to save Russia and keep the army at the front. I need to take this step." So this is a very selfless act from his perspective. And so, even though, again, I don't think the Romanovs as a whole were good and monarchy isn't good, I do have a lot of compassion for Nicholas. I see a really kind person. And that can happen, right? Just as a family of good people can give birth to a psychopath, a family of psychopaths can actually pop out a good person. We see it happen all the time. So Michael refuses to take the throne. Michael Romanov was actually, his younger brother was actually one of the first Romanovs to be killed by the Bolsheviks. So at this point, the monarchy is absolutely done. It's abdicated, it's done. But we have a problem. We've got a huge problem. So Tsar Nicholas II is no longer Tsar Nicholas II. He's just now Colonel Romanov. But what do we do with the Romanovs? And I've thought about this before. Like, I've actually had this thought before. Like, what if King Charles got on TV and was like, "We're done. We're not going to do monarchy anymore. We're going to donate the palaces." Like, do you think Prince William can just go be an accountant? How do they integrate into the population? They are so famous. They were the czars. Like, how do they then integrate into normal? Like, how does that happen? And so this was the quandary that now we have, because the Romanovs are no longer the czars. But what do we do with them? What do we do? We can't just, like, they don't have any other skills besides being royalty. Like, what do we do? Now, at this point, a lot of Nicholas's siblings have now fled Russia. And there's one sibling that we're going to possibly talk about next week. She had a lot to do with the whole Anastasia. Anyway, so that's just kind of an interesting, like, to look at that from that perspective. Like, so basically what they do is they just put them under house arrest. So Nicholas and his family are placed under house arrest at the Alexander Palace in St. Petersburg by the provisional government. So the first place that they're kept under house arrest is like their normal palace. Like, okay. And through all the journal entries, because we still have a lot of their journal entries, like, Nicholas II was really strict with his children when it came to manners. He really wanted his children just to treat their guards with respect. And yes, sir, like, even though they were guarding them, they tried to keep the kids' lives as normal as possible. They play outside with them. And we see in Nicholas's journal entries too, that this small window of time before they go to their last stop was some of the happiest Nicholas had, because he just got to be a dad. Like, he all of a sudden just got to be a husband and a dad. All right. So around this time, okay, so things are ramping up with the Bolshevik. In August of 1917, the Romanovs turned to King George V, both Nicholas's and Alexander's first cousin, to ask if they could seek asylum in the United Kingdom. They're trying to get out of Russia. Again, all of Nicholas's siblings have left besides Michael, who was killed. And George V, there's a lot of conspiracies around this. Some people say he first said yes and then said no. People said he had a flat out no. The reason why they ultimately were not allowed to come to the United Kingdom with their cousin, who they were actually pretty close to, was because George V, who was Elizabeth II's grandfather, feared that if they brought the Romanovs to the United Kingdom, that the same thing would happen. They would bring with them the same energy, the Bolsheviks, and the same thing would happen in the United Kingdom. And so basically George V said, "We're not, sorry, cousin. I can't risk my family to save yours." Okay. So that had to have been heartbreaking. I can't imagine, like, relying on family and then family saying no, but then again, did George V have a soul? I don't know, like, we're looking at, this is just very, I just have so much empathy for them, even though monarchy is bad, I do have empathy for them. So around in October of 1917, the Bolsheviks take over the governmental power. The Romanovs were then moved again to the House of Special Purpose for their protection. And this is the famous house, Ipativ house. I hope I'm saying that right. Ipativ house. And I think I sent you a picture of that house, Shanti. I think it's still standing, the Ipativ house. And they only are allowed to take 5 people with them, 5
This
servants.
one?
Yeah, that's the Ipativ house. So that's that is that's the Ipativ house. That's where that's their last. That was in Siberia. They were 1,000 miles away. At this point, lockdown became even more brutal. They had newspaper put over the windows. They hardly got any fresh air. Now, at night, when they left the original palace, the Romanovs did do something which we'll play into next week's episode. They took a lot of their valuable jewelry with them. And so and I don't know like why they did that. And I've listened to a lot of people talk about, a lot of historians talk about why they think they did that. And maybe it was cognitive dissonance. Maybe they felt like they were going to be freed at some point, and having these valuables would give them resources to start a new life. Obviously, I think looking at this, everybody knows they're not getting out of this alive. Like if you're under this much house arrest and you've got someone like Vladimir, yeah, Lisa D, I think that's what they were thinking. But, again, cognitive dissonance, or that hope, that little shreds of hope they're going to get out of this alive. When you've got someone like Vladimir Lenin, whose literal political strategy is violence, any violence when necessary, as we spoke about last week. So the girls would sit up at night, the daughters would sit up at night sewing these diamonds and this gold into their corsets. And they would wear their corsets so that the guards couldn't see that they had the jewelry on them. Right. So they would, it could have been, I don't know though, because they didn't bribe, there's no things of them bribing. They were literally sewing it into their clothes so that the guards would not know they had this jewelry on them, these diamonds. And again, that's going to play into speculation later, because it could have acted as a bulletproof vest which we'll talk about later. So, at midnight, the 17th of July, 1918, the Romanovs' physician was told to wake the family as they were going to be moved again. They were placed in the basement. They were told they were going to take a photo of the Romanovs in the basement to show the people that the Romanovs were still alive. And that's when they walked in and read them their death warrants. Now, and that's when all hell broke loose. Now, what I thought was interesting is that the guards who were guarding the Romanovs at the Ipativ house in Siberia, they were revolutionaries from that area. They were not trained military men. They were not marksmen. And when they decided that they were going to execute the Romanovs, it took a while. It took a while for them to find guards who were willing to do it. Now, this was unbeknownst to the Romanovs, right? And that kind of gave me a little bit of hope for humanity, even though we know where the Bolsheviks were going, that a lot of these guards, these young boys that were guarding the Ipativ house out in Siberia, they were okay with executing the Tsar, but a lot of them were not okay with hurting the children. So it took them a while to find young boys who were willing. So again, that's even more heartbreaking that so many of these guards were like, I'm not touching the children. Like, we're not going to hurt okay, yes, the Tsar, but not the kids. I'm not going to kill a kid. So they had to scrape the barrel to find the lowest of the low of people who were willing to do that. Now, what's sad with what we know, and again, a lot of this information, which we'll talk about at the end of this, that we know that Nicholas went really quickly because all the guards had their thingies pointed at him. So he went quickly once the death warrant was read. It took a while, though, for the rest of the group to be unalived. And for the daughters, it was chaos. These kids that were doing the job were not trained. They had to bayonet some of them at the end because of all the diamonds in their corsets. They weren't unalived, so they had to go bayonet them. And so let me just read off just in memoriam, because no one deserves that. Nicholas was 50, Alex was 46, Olga was 23, Tatiana was 21, Maria was 19, Anastasia was 17, and little Alexei was only 14 years old. 4 servants also were unalived with them. So that's where we're going to leave it for today. Now, I will give you guys something to ponder before next week when we talk about the claims that Anastasia Romanov survived. When this happened, now, again, none of us were alive back in this time, but if you still got grandparents alive that were people that live closer, they can probably give you more of, I mean, I don't know if anybody would still be alive from that time actually, but once the Iron Curtain fell, once the Bolsheviks were in charge, no information. I mean, think about that. I mean, I was born the Berlin Wall came down in 1889, right? Or 1989 rather. So for those of you who were alive during communism, when the USSR was actively there was it was called the Iron Curtain. You know, information was not released. And so for a long time, the Russian people the Russian people, in all fairness, were just trying to survive anyway, right? Because all of a sudden, communism took everything. It took their humanity. Like there was no religion anymore. There was no spirituality. That you served the state. Everyone was poorer than they had been before. So communism absolutely ripped them of their humanity. And so for many years, nobody really knew what happened to the Romanovs. It was assumed that Nicholas was no longer alive, but nobody knew what had actually happened. And it wasn't until we had our first claim of it, what we now know is an imposter claiming to be Anastasia Romanov, that there was any type of information released, which again, we're going to get to next week. But something I wanted to talk about as well, so I found fascinating. I said on our very first video when we started going through the Romanovs, so the Romanov dynasty started with Anastasia Romanov and is now ending with Anastasia Romanov. But something, I was listening to a professor talk about this, and I noticed a comment. Someone had left a comment. I thought this was fascinating, so I went and looked it up. Michael Romanov, who was the original Romanov way back at the beginning of the series in 1613 when he took the throne, he was living in a monastery at that time called the Ipativ Monastery. So the Romanov dynasty started with an Ipativ house and ended also with an Ipativ house. Talk about a karmic loop. So started with an Anastasia, ended with an Anastasia. So next week, guys, now I already have an opinion of whether she survived or not. I won't share my opinion until next week, though. But I ask you guys, because we're seeing so many people in the new Bolsheviks, which is the truther community, we're seeing so many people make claims like that Melania Trump is the granddaughter of Anastasia and that the Romanovs are coming back and they're going to save us, and bullshit, like total bullshit, right? And again, I say, no, we don't want any royalty saving us. So I ask you guys, I can understand why the Anastasia Romanov conspiracy is so entertaining, because to believe that a 17-year-old child survived that and went on to live a life speaks of the human spirit and the human resilience. So I would ask you, are you fascinated by this conspiracy because it inspires you, because there's hope for humanity, that there's a resilience, that this child overcame a horrific event and lived? Or are you inspired by this because you think someone's going to come save you? Because if you think someone is going to come save you, again, I would ask you to please open up a history book, because you have to save yourself. There are no white hats, you guys. And if there are white hats, they're not white hats because they're taking to allow someone to do that for you is giving your power. That's just a new cabal. We just got a whole new cabal coming in, right? So, now Darren, I'm going to push back on that a little bit. I have German blood. I mean, I have royal blood in me too. My great-great-great-grandfather was from the British royal family. Just because you have an ancestor who was in the royal family says nothing about you. Now, I don't know if Donald Trump is good. I mean, obviously, I hope he's good. That's who I'm, trying to watch my words. That's who I'm like cheering for, because it's the better option. But at the end of the day, I have to rely on myself. So, and I would actually say, you guys, if you look back at any of we all have very shady characters in our family line. All of us. We all got Freemasons in our family line. We all got that. So we have to, and that's why I say, like, the Romanovs, like, I think Nicholas II was probably a pretty good dude. He's probably a pretty good dude, but his family wasn't. I mean, his great-great-great-grandmother was Catherine the Great. I mean, talk about some family trauma. Like that's a weird granny to have. That's some mommy issues right there, right? So we have to be very careful, I think, to look at people as individuals and not their family. right? Because if we just judge people by who their family is, then we're no better than the cabal, right? So anyway, yeah. So anyway, so well, next week is gonna be real juicy because we're actually, I'm just gonna let you guys, there's a woman that claims, for her whole life claimed to be Anastasia. We know now she's not. We're gonna talk about that next week because DNA testing and stuff. And we were watching some stuff on it, and Nancy maybe, but again, it's not they could have, but it has nothing to do with us, right? Because we can't rely on someone to come save us. So again, that's why I ask, are you fascinated by this Anastasia Romanov conspiracy because it speaks of the human will to survive, or is it because you think someone's gonna come save you? Because there's a huge difference between those two. Does that make sense what I'm saying? Like to believe a child survived that and went on to live a full life speaks so highly of the human spirit but to think that happened to that child just so you can be saved is not okay, right? Like they could have had a child and have raised another family, but that doesn't make any difference to us. That's that child. Does that mean like we cannot yeah, but yeah. I mean, they did that, Nancy. But again, that just because a child has a bloodline doesn't say anything about the content of that child's soul, right? Like I have the same blood type as King Charles, and I'm a very different person from King Charles. So anyway, I hope that makes sense. We have to like remove the nature of the person, like the body, the bloodline, the last name from their soul, right, and their free will choice. Yeah. If people are just bad because they were born to a family, then that takes away all free will, right? That takes away and then if we're painting someone bad because they're from the royal family, well, go look in your family bloodline. Like you probably got some questionable. I got questionable people. I know we all got questionable people in our family, bloodline. So, it's just we have to be very, very careful not to judge people just because they. We need evidence of these crimes, right? So anyway, I hope that makes sense. So yeah. So anyway. Yeah.
Cool. Well, there you'll have it.
We'll get
that was our Monday lesson from Professor Brice. And it was very intriguing. At least we got a hottie.
Should we throw Gapon up one more time?
Yeah, let's do that. We're gonna show the hot guy just one more
time. So if a hot guy comes on TV telling you to go strike, just remember this lesson.
Finally.
Yes.
Finally, we have some eye candy.
Yep.
Oh, buddy. Okay.
You don't inbreed, Shanti. When you don't inbreed, you actually get good-looking people. Who would have thought if you don't marry cousins,
you might actually be quite attractive.
You might look normal. You might not have the Habsburg chin or
the sloping forehead and the huge ears.
Yes. So Gapon is, don't. I can't believe in 2024 we just gotta say don't marry your cousins, guys. You're biologically, your DNA is too connected. If you share grandparents, do not marry each other. Like if you're
and if you're absolutely insisting on marrying your cousin or something, then sterilize yourself.
Yes. Like I think about, no offense to my male cousins, but like I'm sure they think the same thing about me too. But
exactly.
You're like my pseudo brother. You're my brother once removed, basically. That's what a cousin is. Your sibling once removed, you guys. Your parents are siblings. Gross. Like that's disgusting. Don't do that. Don't do that. Don't do that.
Run. Okay, everybody. Yeah, we shall see you. When will I see you again? We see probably Wednesday. Yeah, I'm interviewing Rachel from Australia tomorrow, but we're doing a recording, so it won't be live. But then I'll see you guys back on Wednesday again. Take good care of you, and I'm sending you all lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of love. Have a beautiful evening, day, morning, afternoon, wherever you are in the beautiful world. And And you
Bye,
better say
guys.
thanks to Brice for the hot guy and me for keeping it. I'll give you just one more show. There we go.
Should
Look.
we make a t-shirt? Should we make a t-shirt for him? Be like the hottest double agent. The hottest double agent. What I learned from the Great Awakening. Just a picture of him be like, this is what I learned from the Great Awakening.
Yeah, exactly. We'll find something cool. We'll find a cool slogan for him. Cheers, guys.
Bye, guys.